Given an equation quadratic in form, we want to solve it. Number one, we have to identify the exponent on the leading term and determine whether it is double the exponent on the middle term. Number two, if it is, we're going to substitute a variable such as u for the variable portion of the middle term. Number three, we rewrite the equation so that it takes on the standard form of a quadratic. Number four, solve using one of the usual methods for solving a quadratic. Number five, replace the substitution variable with the original term. And number six, solve the remaining equation. So for example number 9, we're going to be solving a fourth degree equation in quadratic form. We're going to solve this fourth degree equation, 3x to the fourth minus 2x squared minus 1 equals 0. Now since it's a fourth degree equation, it's possible that we're going to have 4 solutions. More than likely we will. So this equation fits the main criteria. The power on the leading term is double the power on the middle term. And next we will make a substitution for the variable term in the middle, where we have u is equal to x squared, and write the equation in u. So here we have our equation, and then we have the middle variable term is x squared, which means we have x squared raised to the second power is x to the fourth. So we just got to make sure we bring down the coefficients. So we have 3x squared squared minus 2x squared to the first power minus 1 equals equal to 0. The next step is 3. We're going to let u equal x squared. So now we're going to rewrite this as 3u squared minus 2u minus 1 and set that equal to 0. Now what we have is a quadratic equation in terms of u. And so we need to look at this equation and say, how can we factor this? Well, we can factor this by using the AC method by grouping. So the AC method is taking 3 times negative 1, which is negative 3. So we get negative 3, and then negative 2 is the middle term. So the two numbers we need to multiply to get negative 3 and add to get negative 2 are 1 and negative 3. So we end up getting 3u squared plus 1u minus 3u minus 1. Now what can we factor out of the first two terms? We can factor out a u, and we end up with 3u plus 1. Writing the same thing on this side, what do we need to multiply by 3u to get negative 3u? And what do we need to multiply by plus 1 to get negative 1? We can factor out a negative 1. So now that we factored it, we can then write 3u plus 1 times u minus 1 is equal to 0. And then we're going to use the zero product rule to determine what are the values of u. So 3u plus 1 is equal to 0. We subtract 1 to both sides and then divide by 3. So u is going to equal negative 1/3. Over here we add 1 to both sides and we have u is equal to 1. Now we're not finished there yet because we did a substitution. Because u back in step 3 actually equals what we substituted for, which is x squared. So in step 6 we have to replace the u with x squared. So we now have x squared, which is equal to negative 1/3, or x squared is equal to 1. So in order to get x by itself, we got to use the square root property by taking the square root of both sides. So the square root of x squared is x, and that's going to equal plus or minus the square root of negative 1 over the square root of 3. Well, that becomes plus or minus the square root of negative 1 is I over the square root of 3. Now, we don't want to leave the radical in the denominator, so we need to rationalize the denominator. So going back to what we've done before, in order to rationalize the denominator, we need to multiply what we have in the denominator, which is the square root of 3, in the numerator and the denominator. So we end up getting I times the square root of 3 over 3. So we have x, which is equal to plus or minus I times the square root of 3 over 3. Over here we have the square root of x squared plus x squared equals 1. So taking the square root of both sides, we get x, which is equal to plus or minus 1, because the square root of 1 is 1. So those are our solutions. We have 4 solutions as stated at the beginning of the problem. We have negative 1, negative I times the square root of 3 over 3. We have I times the square root of 3 over 3, and 1.